Hi guys and welcome back. So while shopping for my Japanese clay videos earlier this year, I noticed a very strange type called oil clay. We've all heard of polymer clay, air dry clay, and pottery clay before, but I honestly had no idea what oil clay was. And it wasn't just a single product like the silicone clay from this video, but there were countless brands that all produced their own version of oil clay. So I decided to order several packs and get to the bottom of this mystery. The first thing I noticed is that these are pretty heavy and they have the same density as polymer clay. I'm also going to use Google Translate on the packaging. This live camera mode isn't perfect and it sometimes produces hilarious results, but it's definitely enough to give you a rough idea of what's being said. The main features of oil clay seem to be that it has no smell, it's antibacterial, it doesn't lose its shape, it can be reused, and that it floats on water. Just based on the packaging design, I would say these are all mostly aimed at children. It's a lot cuter compared to professional products like Modena or Fimo clay. I also can't imagine why an adult would need clay that floats, but I think it's a pretty fun detail. When I hear the words oil clay, my gut feeling tells me that this is a type of plasticine. So basically, all types of clay are made using a filler material and a source of moisture. The most common one is water, which evaporates when you leave the clay out in the air, and this of course becomes air dry clay. You're then left with a hardened filler material, which also determines the type of clay. Paper clay contains fillers made from cellulose fibers, cold porcelain clay uses cornstarch, and pottery clay is made from natural minerals. Polymer clay is quite similar, but it needs heat to evaporate the moisture, hence why you have to bake the pieces to harden. Plasticine or plastiline contains oil instead of water, which means that it never evaporates. So this clay always stays soft and it's actually impossible to harden it. Clay that never hardens tends to be used for making sculptural models or stop-motion animations. It's not that popular within the crafting community, where you obviously want to keep all the pieces you make. So I think this is why you rarely see this type of clay mentioned on YouTube. The first clay is called Ukukaru oil clay and it's by the company Debica. Debica makes some great crafting kits, but they're mostly geared towards a younger market and the quality is mid-range. Just as I predicted, this smells exactly like plasticine. The texture, however, is grainier, which I find more pleasant to touch. Imagine a sandy plasticine that mimics the look of pottery clay and you'll get an idea of what this feels like. This has a fairly good consistency and I'm very surprised that one package only costs 380 yen or $2.5. I'm going to sculpt a simple piece based on the chicken from the packaging. The clay sticks to itself reasonably well, much better than the rice clay from this video, but you should definitely smooth down all the edges when you're attaching two pieces together. Unlike air dry clay, you can't make this clay stickier by adding water, so in that respect it feels a lot like working with polymer clay. It has the same density and slightly oily texture. It holds detail very well and you can use all sorts of tools on it. I'm quite pleased with how my chicken turned out. I'm not expecting this to dry out, which is a slight shame because I wouldn't mind keeping it forever. The only thing I don't like about this clay is that it leaves a waxy layer of oil on your hands, which is hard to get off even with soap and water. Though I read later on that rubbing alcohol works well, so you might be able to get it off using hand sanitizer. Next comes Karui clay by Padiko, which is a company that's known for high quality products. I trust everything by Padiko and I've used a lot of their resin clays for making jewelry. To my surprise, this package contains almost double the amount as Ukukaru clay, but costs virtually the same. So Padiko's oil clay is definitely better value for money. Once opened up, I also can't see or smell the difference between these two. I actually had to reopen the first one to compare. Both have the exact grainy plasticine texture, the same color, and the same selling points listed on the packaging. I'm pretty shocked that this comes from two different companies because normally you always find tiny differences between brands, even if it's just the smell. I'm going to make the giraffe on the back of the package here, and this clay also feels the same as the other one. I find oil clay slightly tricky to join together, so I'm going to try making as much of the body as possible using one piece. I wouldn't recommend trying to attach 4 legs separately because it's going to be a struggle getting all the edges smooth. The only piece I'm adding on afterwards is the head. Smaller elements are much easier to stick on, so it's not that hard to create details like ears and horns. I'm using a ball tool to press in the eyes, and this also shows how well the clay holds details. A cheaper clay, like many of the paper clays I tried in this video, has an elastic surface, so you can't push in one area without distorting another area. In this case, everything worked great, and my little giraffe is done. Last but not least comes OurTech oil clay. This is the most expensive from the whole bunch, although at $6 it's still very reasonable. I'm really surprised how cheap all of these are, as it's very rare to find such a volume of clay for this price. Even Play-Doh costs a lot more. This one reminds me of white polymer clay, and it has a perfectly smooth texture. Another thing about oil clay is that it might feel hard in the packaging, but it's always going to turn soft when you need it. I'm going to make a little frog based on the picture from the other clay package. The pure white base makes it tempting to add color, but most types of paint are water-based, so they're not going to work with an oil clay. I do want to test out a few different ways of adding color to oil clay for a YouTube short, so please subscribe if you don't want to miss that. This one doesn't stick to itself as well as the other two, however it's a very minimal difference. Once again, it's super satisfying to add details because the outlines remain so crisp. However, even now I'm feeling a bit sad that I won't get to keep this forever. Of course, you can technically leave an oil clay piece around as decoration, but there's always going to be a risk of it getting squished or damaged. Oil clay is often used by people who create silicone molds, so the final piece is cast using a different material, and the clay part is essentially just a rough draft. But one upside of having clay that never dries out is that it can be reused many times. I think this is why these products look like they're being marketed at parents. You can save a lot of time and money by letting your kids play with this. And finally, I have to test out if these actually float. As mentioned earlier, these have the same weight as polymer clay, so it's slightly strange to imagine that. But to my surprise, the Ukukaru and Karui clays both floated without any problems. They're also water resistant, and you can see the droplets rolling off. This is most likely due to the high oil content, so it creates a hydrophobic surface. Both of these clays must contain a filler material that's less dense than H2O. Once combined with oil, which also floats on water, it keeps the piece on the surface. I have to say this is a pretty cool trick because the clay feels quite heavy, but I can't imagine when you'd really need this for crafting. I decided to make a lily pad for the frog and see if I can get this whole thing to float. But I didn't realize that this third clay is the only one that doesn't float, so the one creature I made, which is supposed to sit on water, ended up sinking right away. I checked the packaging again, and it doesn't mention anything about putting the clay in water on here. It also feels exactly like heavy plasticine, so I wasn't sure what I was expecting. But this was still a fun experiment, and it's interesting to see the different properties of each brand. I think that Padiko's Karui clay is the best out of all three because it's identical but quite a bit cheaper than Debica's clay. I also like the unusual sandy texture, even if it does feel a bit greasy. As you can see here, oil clay really doesn't dry out, so you always have to be a bit careful not to scratch or squash your piece by accident. The OurTech clay is okay, but it's basically a big block of plasticine. One of the selling points here is that it's pure white, which many other oil clays aren't, so I guess that's good if you want to make something which looks very smooth and clean. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I have several more clay reviews coming up, so please subscribe if you haven't done so yet. I'm Joanna, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye!